All righty, here we go. Wednesday, March 4th. Welcome to another Water Cooler Wednesday. Joined as always with by Dwayne Gibbs. Dwayne, what's happening?
It's happening. It's happening. Looks like we have turned the corner here in North Carolina for some better weather. Had a
Yeah,
cold winter.
I think that's pretty much everywhere right now,
Yeah.
which is awesome. Uh, yeah. Let's see. So I don't have PowerPoints for you today because this story that I'm going to tell you is going to illustrate a lot of different concepts within it, and it's so fresh in my mind because it just happened yesterday. So,
Mm-hmm.
but interesting story that'll bring back a lot of the relevance of things that we talk about on this on what to do and you know part of learning a new skill set, in the hopes of mastering something new, such as investing in notes, no matter what level that you're at, there's always things that you can learn by, and part of it comes in the form of repetition, and one of the things that more seasoned people like myself have as an advantage over people that are new is simply that backlog of seen it before, done it, ran into that before, know what to do, know how to handle it, and learning from the mistakes and the victories, so to speak, along the way. New people, again, either you learn that on your own through that same process, or you learn from people who have been through that. So that's the point of listening to shows like this and my podcast. Also, you can listen to anywhere you get podcasts. I've got a lot of tip of the days on the YouTube channel, and I put those on X and Facebook and LinkedIn and all that sort of stuff. So the more you get exposed to these things, the more it just goes towards that ultimate experience, which shortens the learning curve for this business, but really in life in general. That's how stuff works, right? I mean, you anytime you've got a new skill set, you've got a learning curve. So how can we compress that to get results out of it, right?
Mm-hmm. No question.
So what I got an email the other day from a long-term client. So I've got clients who've been with me for almost 9 years, and this is one of those people that goes back on the consulting side, and they at some level. The way I approach this business and teach this business is you're not going to be dependent on me forever. That's ultimately what you want, right? If you're an investor and you're just solely dependent forever, in the beginning, fine, but forever on another party, there's obvious risk inherent with that. So the way I teach things is to get people where they can do it on their own. But once again, you're likely to run into some things down the road that you haven't encountered yet. And that's where you can, boom, come back to the your mentor, me, and let me help you out through that. So that's why I have people who keep me on a retainer, so to speak, every single year. I may not hear from them for a year. In fact, when this gentleman emailed me, I knew the name, but I had to look him up. I'm like, boy, it's been a year since I've spoken with him. But again, keeps me on retainer for reasons just like this. So he reached out and he said, "Hey, um, I got to schedule a Zoom with you." Great. So we got on and started talking. He goes, "This goes back to the deal that we talked about last year." And before the call, Dwayne, I prepped, right? So I looked up the email. I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
okay, he
yeah.
was dealing with this. So it's been a year. And sure enough, that's what he was talking about because he had a performing note that went bad. Okay. And guess what, everybody? That happens from time to time. But this note went irreparably bad. And what I mean by that, most of the time when a note goes bad, it's fixable, right? We can
Mm.
do some kind of modifications, we can do forbearances, we can do all sorts of things to help people get over a stumbling block, right? So if somebody loses a job, somebody gets divorced, whatever it is, that's a temporary situation. So rather than just go through the whole foreclosure thing and all that sort of stuff, we have a tendency to work with people and say, well, what can you afford during this period of time, during this 2, 3, 4 months, where you need some help, or 6 months, whatever it is. This one couldn't work out because the borrower died.
Mm.
Okay. So
Happens.
yeah. What do you do when a borrower dies? Now, this borrower, before they passed away, was behind on payments. So of course he didn't know the full story. My client, he didn't know the full story of what was happening. Um, with this person. I don't know if it was sudden or what it was, but the person was defaulted before. And that's what we talked about a year ago, where we were trying to work through this situation and deciding on, okay, it's definitely time to send a demand letter. And I always recommend with demand letters, 9 times out of 10, I recommend a demand letter coming from an attorney, not a servicing company. And let me explain why I mean that.
Hmm.
Servicing companies, when a loan is late. Okay, late is they've passed their grace period. Okay, that's just considered late. They will make a phone call, they will email if they have an email address, and they will send a letter. After 30 days late, then the note is in default, if you will. That's the terminology. So after 30 days, it's in default, and they again fire off some phone calls, send out some letters. It's still in the default process until 90 days. At 90 days, it's considered delinquent. Okay, so that's the series of correct terminology. Now, not everybody in our industry uses correct terminology, okay, but that's really how it's laid out. But 90 days is the trigger point because most states make you wait at least 90 days before you can initiate a foreclosure process. So during that buildup of the 90 days, your servicing company is going to work. Okay. And some of them will enact what they call a high touch service. And that can be triggered at 60 days with some companies, 90 days with other companies. So all of a sudden, your monthly payment to the servicing company goes up. Why would it go up if the people aren't paying? Because it's high touch. They've got to reach out more. So the servicing company's paying their employees and everything else to do more. So that's how it works. So that when that starts at 90 days, you really have to make a decision. And the decision at that point is the next step, which is a pre foreclosure, which is the demand letter. So a demand letter can come from the servicing company or it can come from an attorney. So which carries more weight just between those two?
Attorney.
Attorney, right? I mean, it's just obvious. If somebody gets a letter from a servicing company, that's one thing. If it was the same letter on the attorney's letterhead, it's still going to get a higher response. Okay. And it's somebody different. Because when you think about it, my logic in this is they've already heard from the servicing company, right? When it was late, when it was delinquent, when it was in default, when, they've heard from the servicing company by phone and by letters. And guess what? They haven't responded. That's why what's what the demand letter is all about. The demand letter is that shock and awe kind of thing where it's like, hey, we're letting you know we have tried for 3 months to get you to contact us to work something out. You still have not made a payment. We have no choice now but to initiate the foreclosure process. If you want to stop that, contact us because here's some other possible solutions for you. Okay. But it's more strongly worded, obviously, than if somebody is 30 days late. Okay. 30 days late, it's like, hey, man, just letting you know, you might have sent your payment. If you did, we're cool. If not, time to send it in, a little reminder, not quite those words, right? But in spirit. So that's what we're looking at. Um, that's why I believe a demand letter from the attorney is a better scenario because it gets more impact. It wakes somebody up, and most of the time it does. And then they reach out and they find out that we do have solutions, and we're not the bad guy, and let's figure this thing out. Okay, so my client a year ago, we're working with I told him just what I told you guys a minute ago. Send the default letter, make it through an attorney, and if they don't respond, here's what we're going to do, right? We're going to initiate the foreclosure. So let's start looking, that attorney, let's figure out the cost on that and time and money now. So if you have to do that, we're prepared, right? So you always work through these whole scenarios, and scenario one, here's some kind of workouts that we can do. Scenario two, we have to take it to the next step of foreclosure. So we were prepared for any which way that customer reacts. And that's a smart way to do it because you don't know how that person is going to react. So while the person was still living, they were still in default. They started to initiate some payments again, but again, they're going to be eternally in that default range because they hadn't made a payment for 6 months. And then all of a sudden, just the payment stopped again, and it's like, okay. Then he figured out the rest of the story. The person had passed. Okay, what do you do? This was a contract for deed. So in a contract for deed, the note owner actually has legal title to the property until paid in full. Okay. Quite different from a mortgage or a deed of trust. A contract for deed is just that. It's an agreement, it's a contract to get the deed. So in the meantime, the deed is maintained by the note owner. So that's one scenario where the note owner is also the legal property owner, not entitled to equity, but entitled to the legal ownership until paid in full. So that's the scenario. Well, they pass away, and he gets a response from this other couple who apparently was related to the deceased. And they started to think about, well, can we take over the payments? And I think most of you listening would say, well, yeah, if they're going to take over the payments, great. I don't need to foreclose. I don't need to go through that expense. I don't need to deal with owning the property. Great. My cash flow starts up again. So that's what they did. And the people just started making payments. But they never signed a document. They never had a written agreement.
Mm, that's not good.
Folks, in real estate, if it's not in writing, it's not real. It's as simple as that. Now, you can have handshake deals, verbal contracts, whatever you want in real estate. It's not illegal to do that. It's just not enforceable. Okay. There's no legal
That's the
recourse
word.
to the law. It
That's
has
the word.
to be in writing when it comes to real estate. So, what they really had is a situation where you've got a person agreeing to make payments, but not legally obligated to, just handshake agreement, willing to do. So that's scenario number one that's going on. And they've been making the payments. Great. They set it up, I think, even through ACH. So it's automatic payments. So that's upon my discovery. So I can come up with a solution, everybody. You got to gather information, right? And then we have to organize and analyze it. So that was scenario number one. Okay. Now, that's a mistake, everybody. That should have been in writing. Okay. And how you do, he could have done a lease option with them. It's a whole new note. I'm not going to have them assume that note. It's going to be, we're starting over. Here's a new balance, the whole thing. I'm not letting them take over where the other guy was. I don't know them. The property's gone up in value. I'm going to change the whole deal because they have no right. If my client could have very easily enforced the language of the contract for deed and taken over the property, and then they would be nowhere. So I would have done a whole different arrangement than that, and it would have been in writing. But that's what happened. So when I'm consulting with people, I can't deal with a woulda, coulda, shoulda. It's okay. That's what you did. I wish you would have, scheduled a call or a Zoom with me beforehand because I would have told you, no, whole new deal with them, whole new price, bigger note because the property's worth more, whatever the scenario is. Okay. So that's mistake number one. Mistake number two, I found out, was covering your risk. There's risk inherent in everything. We have less risk in the note business than the traditional real estate business. Why? Because in most scenarios, we do not own the real estate. Owning real estate comes with responsibilities and liabilities. Someone gets hurt on that property, you are liable. Why? Because you own it. Think about it, if you're a landlord and your tenant's been complaining about the roof leaking and the water on the floor, and then they slip and fall and you didn't get around to fixing it for a week or so, guess what? You're liable. You're 100% liable. Okay. If I own a note on a property and their roof is leaking and they slip and fall, I'm not liable. I don't own the property. I just own the debt. I'm the bank. Whole different scenario. But if you recall, I mentioned that this is a contract for deed. And in a contract for deed, the note owner is on the title to the property. Does that bring in some liability? Well, go back to my same scenario. If this couple with two kids got hurt on that property, they're going to sue. And when people sue, they go after the party with what?
The most assets.
Of course, right? They go after the money. They go after the money. And guess what? You're on the title to the property, and you can say all day long, but the contract says that they're responsible. They don't care. The law doesn't care.
Right.
They're going to say, yeah, but you know what? You're on the title. So how do we cover a risk like that? Insurance, right? So I asked him, okay, what kind of insurance are we talking about here? He said, forced place. I said, okay. And again, the verbiage in our industry sometimes gets very foggy, everybody. Um, forced place insurance traditionally just covers hazard, meaning if the house catches on fire, something like that, it covers that. It doesn't cover liability. And we use that a lot in our industry because, for the most part, if we're buying a mortgage, if we're buying a deed of trust, we're the bank, we don't have liability. So why cover ourselves for that? But our collateral could go up in smoke. So we do want to cover that risk through hazard. That's what forced place insurance traditionally is. In a scenario like this, where he's on the title to the property, he's opening himself up for potential liability because he's on the title to the property. So he needs liability insurance along with that. Forced place, by its definition, doesn't typically have that. There's another type of policy that would have both hazard and liability. That's what he needs. Now, unfortunately, some people still call that forced place insurance with liability. So that's what I mean. It gets a little fuzzy. So I asked him, I said, does your insurance, because I wasn't familiar with the company he was using, I said, does that include liability as well as hazard? He didn't know the answer. And I
That's
bet you, 90% wouldn't know the answer to that. They just, I got insurance. Okay, right? I got property insurance. That's all I know. So that's
yeah.
another mistake. Okay. In those type of arrangements, you've got to have that liability. So what I'm doing again is gathering this info here. So getting to the root of the main problem. What triggered him to set up a consulting session with me was he got a phone call from the mayor of this town.
Mm, mm,
This town is 5,000 people. He got a phone call. No, I apologize. A letter from the mayor.
mm.
Have you ever heard that happen?
Well, I'm in a town of 3,800 people and I know the mayor and I'm friends with him. So he probably would just walk to my door, but because he lives right across the
Yeah.
street from me, I can see his house way across yonder. But
Yeah.
no, I've never heard that.
Yeah. I've only had one other scenario where the mayor contacted somebody, and that was our
And it
buddy.
wasn't for a local barbecue neither.
No, that was our no, our buddy up in Michigan, you know.
Yeah.
Um for some reason I'm drawing a blank on his name, but you would know. I would just say his last name and you know who I'm talking about. But anyway, and it worked out really well for him, by the way, because the mayor was calling in that case for a positive thing. In this case, the mayor reached out on the letter, and the letter basically said, hey, look, this property is in complete disrepair. We're going to have to put a notice on there of condemnation.
Yeah.
You've got the roof is falling apart. We've already, and last year, my
It's a
client told me,
hazard.
last year, he goes, I got contacted by the city because the people just had so much junk out on the front patio and they resolved that issue. This time it's like this property is in
Pretty
bad,
bad.
bad, bad shape to the point we're concerned that somebody's going to get hurt. Again, that's where the insurance stuff came up. And they've got two small kids, and we're worried about the kids. Well, it also turns out that the police have visited the house, the child advocacy, or
Services,
what is it?
child services.
Yeah, child services has been out to the house. Um, and there's concern. So I thought it was really cool that the mayor just reached out and gave like a hey man, this is going to happen, and we notice that you're the owner of record
Wellness check.
on this property, and it's going to be condemned. And so he called the mayor. And in those scenarios, everybody, you've got to understand the mayor wants a solution to a problem. The problem is you have this junky house on the corner in a nice neighborhood, and it's problematic for property values. The police have been out there for domestic incidents, that sort of thing. This is not good, not wanted in that community. The mayor literally says, "I walk my city." There's like 10 streets or something. He goes, my wife and I, we literally walk the
Yeah.
city. And he goes, this is a big problem. And it is. So his scenario is, what do I do? You know? Um, and there's all kinds of options, right? He could fix up the property. Um, he could tear it down, evict the people. How do you get them out of there? They're not even on the contract. What do we do? So we started to peel this back, and I said, well, essentially, if they're not on any kind of written agreement, they're really what they call a tenant of sufferance, with the added benefit of possibly equity, but they haven't signed anything. So really, they're just a tenant of sufferance, which means they're just there until you decide to get them out. That's really all it is. They have no lease. They are not on the deceased party is still the one that is signed on the document, for the equitable interest and that sort of thing. So they really have nothing.
Does that fall under a squatter's law, though? I mean,
Potentially, if he allows them to stay at a certain time, the law will implicate, well, even though it wasn't a written agreement, they do have certain rights, and you can't
yeah,
just
if
kick
they're
them out.
getting mailed there and all, I,
But the danger of the city's thinking we could get sued as well because we've
sure,
identified this problem. And if we don't condemn it and they get hurt, not only
yeah,
could they sue this guy, but they're going to sue the city.
sure,
So this is a problem. So my client, before he scheduled the call with me, did call the mayor. And he said the mayor was very nice. He said, I had no idea that the property was in that condition. And again, when you're a note owner, for the most part, you really don't, right? I mean, you're not watching the property year to year, especially if you have a portfolio. Are you sending somebody out there every single year? No. So he genuinely, my client, did not know the condition of the property. Now he knew it was a little rough from before, but it had gone pretty darn bad. Um, and I'm not going to pull up the property and show you. It was pretty bad.
mm,
The roof was definitely leaking. The guy said there's holes in the roof. I didn't see holes in the roof, but it is definitely leaking. There's no question about that.
yeah,
And there's issues on it. So he talked with the mayor. He said, "Look, I want to help resolve this." He said, "I have no idea," and he said, "But I'm the lender." In this case. Why did the mayor, by the way, send a letter to him? How do you figure out who that was? Because he's on the title of the property. So the mayor just went to his registrar's office or recorder's office and said, who owns this property? Well, my client came up. Why? Because it's a contract for deed. So he should be on there
hmm
and he's on there. So he said, I'm just a lender, but I'll figure out what to do, and I want to work with you. And the mayor said, well, we need to move pretty quick on this, and you know, uh, let me know, call me back. So he scheduled the appointment with me, and we played through every scenario. And uh, I kind of came to the conclusion. I said, here's the other side of this, which my client was very sensitive to as well. He goes, his initial thought was, I'm going to do some kind of cash for keys arrangement, and help them out. And I said, the monthly payments on this property, I looked it up, are like $250 a month. Where can this couple with their two kids go in this city for $250 a month?
yeah,
Can't do it, right?
mm-mm.
So I said, you're essentially going to make them homeless. And that's a hard thing to, to think about. But this is a business, but an ethical business. What can we do? So I suggested, I said, look, the mayor seems like a good dude, and you have a good relationship. You handle it very well with him. He's going to be your savior, I think, in this deal. Um, Go back to the mayor, find out if there's temporary shelter, find out if there's a church, some kind of charitable organization that is willing to take these people in for a short period of time until they can get on their feet, move back with mom, and whatever scenario that they end up working out. But the reality is they cannot live in this house. So this is not some kind of a eviction. This is a thing where the house is really
The hazard.
unlivable. Yeah. So take that part out of the equation. You have to remove these people.
Hmm.
Okay, for their sake, yours, everybody's sake. So there's no question on that. So what are we going to do? So I said, let's preempt that because you're going to have to give them the bad news that they're out and you have no choice. But at least maybe you can lend a helping hand, to see if there's some kind of a grant that would give them, some money for housing, that sort of thing. You certainly can give some kind of cash for keys, but again, you can't be expected to give, well, here's $5,000 to help you out, sort of thing. So he's going to do that and figure out how he can go, here's the bad news, but here's the good news. If you would like, there's temporary housing going to be set available for you, boom, 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 and probably in much better condition than they're living in, right now. I said cash for keys, if you go that option, based on the pictures I saw before from a year ago with the junk they had on the outside, what do you think the inside looks like?
Yeah,
If it's
sure.
junky outside, it's junky inside, everybody. It's just
It's
a
probably
couple of
got
things.
mold
If it's
and
nice
bugs and everything.
outside, it's
Yeah,
nice inside. It just
yeah,
works that way 99% of the time. I said, you're not going to do cash for keys and when the house is all swept clean, I'll pay you that. Then he can, let's throw that out the window. And the other thing is the mayor offered to buy the property. And I said, look, if you wanted to take this property back and go under the condemnation and then you start fixing the thing up, the city will give you time to do that. But you're putting more money into it, this, that, and the other. Do you want to be that active? Um, and his answer was no. I said, okay, then your way to go is to have the city buy it from you. And I said, the other part of that is the city will help with the eviction process. I'm sure if you agree to that, the mayor will send out the sheriff and let the people know, hey, look, this is a serious situation. You've got 3 days to move out. Okay. And probably even tell them you don't need to just take what you want, leave what you don't, because they're going to tear the house down anyway.
yeah,
That's what the city's going to do. It's going to tear it down. And the city will end up taking that lot and reselling it to somebody. And that somebody's going to build a nice house that's more conformative to the neighborhood and be better neighbors for all purposes in that community. Um, so the other suggestion I said, if you prefer, you could give it to the city and take a tax deduction, because his question was, well, how much do you think the city would pay? I said, I'm sure, look, you've got a good rapport with the mayor. Ask the mayor. And then I did a little research on AI, by the way, and after our call, and because I was curious. And Grok, the AI that I use, I had already looked. Well, I got ahead of myself there. I looked up the property while I was on the call with my client, and I said this property is still assessed for taxes at $38,000. Now they only owe 10 grand.
mm,
Okay. They only owe about 10 grand on, well, again, these people don't owe anything really, but
right,
if
right,
he were to
right.
continue that note, it's a $10,000 balance, So the whole thing's a little weird because there's no contract. So they don't really have anything, but the balance on the pre-existing deal with the person who passed away was about 10 grand. So I said, look, maybe it's better for you just to give it to the city and write it off for 40 grand if that works for your taxes. And he didn't want to do that because he actually owned this note, but he sold it to an investor friend and he was just mediating that. I said, okay. And he goes, I don't want to go to him. And no problem. I said, then sell it to the city. I said, it's being tax assessed for 38. I bet the mayor gives you 15 grand. I
Hmm.
bet they might give you 20. So I was curious about that question. And I put that into Grok and AI, and it came back. They said based upon this, that, and the other, they would probably pay about $30,000.
Really?
Now,
Wow.
there'll be a
Whether
part
he
two to
does
this
or not.
because,
Right, right,
yeah,
right,
I
right.
don't know, but I prompted this thing, and first when I first told it was assuming he was in a different area, and which would have been a higher payout. And then I said, oh, sorry, this is in this county, Rudolph County, something Randolph, something like that. And it said, oh, well, that's more rural, that's a little smaller, recalculate. They'll probably come in, at close to $30,000 for that. And I'm like, there's your answer. There's
Yeah.
no question. And it also laid out, here's the code. And what you do is this, you file an immediate juncture that they need to move out. It's a 3-day thing. The sheriff goes out and handles that. That's all under code. There's no questions about it. They handle the whole process because it is an emergency situation. There's a high risk of somebody getting hurt on that property. And again, remember his insurance situation. And I told him essentially with the insurance, I said, to be honest with you, even though you have hazard insurance, probably hazard only, they're not going to pay if
Yeah.
they see the condition of what that house was, because when you get forced place insurance, they don't really look at the condition of the house. They make some assumptions. But there's a clause in there that says, we're assuming it's in this condition. If it's not, we ain't covering anything, you know?
Right.
So they wouldn't have covered that. I said, if there's liability on it, I said, they wouldn't cover you anyway because of the condition of the house. You get it, let it get to the point of condemnation. They're not going to cover that. There's going to be a loophole for the insurance companies to bail out. I said, what I would do right away is get an umbrella liability policy for you or your business, who's ever named that thing is in. You can get $1 million worth of that for less than $1,000 a year, and you can get that right away. I said that would be my backup in case, God forbid, something does happen, and you could do that pretty quickly, but it just laid out the whole code and said, here's what you do. So I told him, armed with this information, go back to the mayor and say, yes, let's proceed. How much, I'd be willing to sell this to the city. So the city will take action right away. There's no, if he were to want to have to tear this property down, I'm sure there's permits and you have to pay this and you got to do that. You got to, have all this stuff and special insurance on it. It's like give it to the city, and
Let them deal with that.
exactly, especially, your investor really is only entitled to about 10 grand. So I said, if you get $20,000, take it. And if you give the whole 20 to your friend investor, fine. But you're really only obligated to pay them 10, but that's up to you and what you want to do. And the bottom line comes down to, I guess, is, what we say all the time, which is you got to know how to buy right. So
Yeah.
even in this completely crazy scenario, he might come out of this with $30,000 when he's only needs get paid off 10. Nuts.
It is nuts.
And now again, in a way, luck was, live lucky. In a way, he had some luck on this thing. He made some mistakes, not being properly insured. You got to cover your risk. Not having things in writing, not knowing the condition of the property. Uh, there's no way he screened these people as to affordability, but I get it. It's $250 a month. But those are mistakes. But luckily, because of the still remaining collateral value, which is probably mostly the land was assessed, they still assess the house for something, but it's a corner lot. And there's nice houses around this, so the
Hmm.
city's going to do well on this. They're going to probably come in and raise it, tear it down and either sell the lot or build something themselves on it that fits the neighborhood. So he's going to come out great, even if he just gets 10 grand. His investor is made fully whole. Everybody's happy. City's happy. He's happy. If there's more money in it than that, that's just on the top of it. And hopefully everything gets done before anybody, God forbid, gets hurt. And the really big cherry on top would be he really helps these people too, saying, look, we've already looked into it. If you want to, shelters available. They're going to let you stay for a month or two, and until you can get, figure out what you're going to do, and that would be great.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think that the most important thing to look at here is this family with two kids can be in some safe sanitary housing, unlike what they're in right now. So at
Yeah.
the end of the day, that's really important. And I want to say this, this is a oddity. I mean, you and I haven't seen something, I haven't seen
No.
something like this in a long time. So people say, "Oh my goodness, I don't want to be in a position of having to throw people out." I think that you have more, well, I know there is more of a situation where people aren't paying, not condemning wise, and you have to throw them out on the street. It's more of, hey, they're not paying, so they don't deserve to stay. So,
Mhm.
you know, just want to throw that out there.
No, you're right. And like I said, he definitely made some mistakes that got into this situation. It's just he's going to end up getting lucky on this one. Um, and again, I really think the city's going to take care of these people at least temporarily until they can get something done. So I think it's going to have a really good, happy ending, even though mistakes clearly, mistakes were made. And to your point, the vast amount of times people end up staying and paying, and they run into speed bumps in their life, if you will. Again, job loss a lot of times, divorces, breakups, that causes a temporary default situation. But then people, get around to, okay, I'm making more money again, I got a new job or whatever, and they start making payments again. That is the vast majority of time because note investors are note investors. They want the
Right.
note. They don't want the real estate. They don't want to foreclose on anybody. Let's work something out. They just want the cash flow. That's what we're looking at. So like I said, I've never had to foreclose on anybody. But you have to threaten it because there are some people who, number one, don't know what to do. And that's the vast majority of cases, by the way. And there's people who abuse the system, and that's the minority of times that it happens. So the majority of times, it's people don't know what to do, so they don't want to pick up the phone, they don't want to answer an email until they get that demand letter from the
And
attorney.
I think there are people out there that are just habitual non-payers where I mean they get the same call from the car company
Yeah,
because they're not making car payment, they're getting it from their credit card company, now they're getting it from their mortgage company. It definitely has a different impact if it's coming from an attorney, somebody of way higher stature and
right.
something different, a different letter coming. Um, versus something that they're constantly familiar with seeing in the mail and just throwing it away. So
Yeah.
I think case in point, what you're saying is that that's completely makes
And here's
sense.
the other thing, everybody. Yeah, and there's even professional scammers that will abuse the laws and they look for this seller finance stuff. Seller finance, oh, I'll go in there, I'll move in there, I'll make a couple payments, never make another payment. And
Yeah.
then they'll start to play with the law. And there's definitely professionalized people that do that. But yet you still have investors who don't pre-qualify people. That's why you pre-qualify people. Somebody who's a scammer is not going to give all of their information of where they work and how much they make and their tax returns and all. That's all a part of the underwriting process. That's all a part of the process. You screen out the bad if you do that, folks. That was another mistake this person, my client, made. If he would have called me ahead of time, I would no. You get these people underwritten. You redo a whole. I would have had this whole thing be different, and we would have looked at the condition of the property. So clearly, mistakes were made. If you get into it, and I guess we'll wrap it up with this. If you get into a situation where you don't know what to do, the time to ask for advice is then, not afterwards. You go, well, here's what I did. Was that wrong?
Yeah.
George Costanza.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Remember that
Is that
episode?
wrong?
Was that wrong?
Is that
See, if I would
wrong?
have known that was wrong,
Yeah.
yeah, ask for the advice ahead of time when you're in a situation that you don't know what to do, and that way you'll prevent a lot of these mistakes. So there
And
you go.
two, being able to, and I'll say this into your program and the benefit of being able to be on a retainer, and it's very minimal of a cost to have the ear and the professionalism and the extreme knowledge of knowing the business and what to do. Because listen, you're at a point where you're investing. It's not his deal. He has an
Yeah.
investor involved. Now he's sweating. And how am I going to make this right for my investor? What am I going to do? I really can't figure it out. I'm not really sure. But to have you on a retainer for that, I know that you do that for your students, and that's,
Yeah.
I mean, especially for the cost, it's just,
Yeah. For the
it's
cost of what you guys
ridiculous.
are paying for streaming accounts that you don't even watch. Right.
Yeah. But listen to TikTok and Facebook because
Yeah.
that's all right information, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway, all right, everybody. So I hope you enjoyed that. Go to kevinshortell.com, check it out. And if you're looking for a good mentor or even a business partner, that's what we're all about. And you can set appointments with Dwayne right from the website and have a conversation and we'll get you straight in the business, get you to the next level, or get you started. Either way, we've done it all. So thanks everybody. And if you enjoy this, please share it with somebody else and let them know every Wednesday morning, 9 o'clock, live on Facebook, and they rebroadcast on YouTube and X a little bit later on in the day. So there you go. Thanks, Dwayne, as always. And
See ya.
we'll see y'all next week.
All right.